My name is Kyle Knapp. Some of you know me. I'm that guy that plays guitar here at Urban Abbey. They don't usually let me talk. Today I've been invited to share some thoughts about sacred and patriotic music and love of country. So I'm going to do that. I was born just after midnight on November 7th, 1956, the night Republican Dwight Eisenhower was reelected president, much to the disappointment of my parents, who had, not my birth, it was the election, who had actually actively campaigned for the Democratic contender, Adlai Stevenson. My dad had joked about naming me Estes Adlai if I was born a boy, after Adlai Stevenson and his running mate Estes Kefauver. Thankfully, Mom vetoed that idea. But seriously, I don't think they thought much about boy names at all. They already had a boy, my older brother, John Wesley. Me, they planned to name Rhonda after my father, Ron, because of course I was going to be a girl. Kyle was an afterthought. Meanwhile, Eisenhower won the election easily, riding the wave of God and country sentiment that had served him well in the previous election. Keeping a campaign promise, he enacted law making "In God We Trust" our nation's official motto, and adding the words "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, which prior to my lifetime had never contained any religious language at all. This shifted the focus of the pledge from liberty and justice for all to one nation under God. But I didn't understand any of this. I was just a baby. I grew up believing America was the land of the free and the home of the brave. I played war games with my friends, not understanding why my parents didn't like me playing with G.I. Joes and toy guns. I moved my feet to John Philip Sousa's marches and sang "America the Beautiful" with passion. Obviously, we were the good guys. But as I learned about war, I saw quickly that it was evil. It was immoral, wrong, always. And I began to notice how many of our patriotic songs and even how many of the hymns of the church depicted war imagery. They did so with pride, but I could only see shame in it. Even as a child, I knew there was no glory in war. In the 1960s, the advent of television brought the horrors of war for the first time in history right into our living rooms. No wonder so many young people rose up in protest, refusing to comply with the draft, condemning war, crying for justice, not just for victims of war, but also for the struggle for civil rights, which was blazing at the same time. Often even as agents of American justice, justice in quotes, committed acts of violence against them on live TV. I wondered why there were only thousands of protesters. Why wasn't everyone rising up in outrage to say enough? But they didn't. Richard Nixon was reelected by a landslide, and those who favored a white Christian America continued to find creative ways to deny power to minorities, women, and others over whom they felt entitled to claim a birthright of superiority. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. Cool, sure, that's great. I want to be blessed. I want my country to be blessed. But what about everybody else? Isn't it selfish, even sinful? Isn't it contrary to everything Jesus taught us to not seek blessings for everyone, including our enemies? And against the backdrop of all this noise, there were the voices of the prophets. I've long held that musicians, along with painters, poets, and other artists, are often the prophets of their generation. You might not recognize them the way you would Jeremiah, Daniel, or Amos in the Bible. They don't stand up in a crowd and shout, "Thus saith the Lord." They might not even be religious people at all, but they fill a prophetic role in our community. I understand prophecy to mean the speaking of truth, often uncomfortable truth, to a generation. Here are a few examples. Depression era folk legend Woody Guthrie was so offended by Irving Berlin's God Bless America that he wrote, "This land is your land," in response. Johnny Cash challenged the land of the free myth with his song, "All God's Children Ain't Free," which we will sing during communion today. Larry Norman, a pioneer of what became known as Christian rock music, was banned from religious radio and labeled demonic because he wore his hair long, sang rock and roll, and felt compelled by his Christian faith to speak out against racism and the Vietnam War. Also, during the Vietnam War, a postal worker by the name of John Prine happened to be delivering an issue of Reader's Digest containing a peel and stick American flag sticker. These stickers kept falling out of the magazines, making a mess as they ended up stuck to sidewalks and signs and lampposts. Littering Chicago was such a symbol of national pride at the same time that our nation was actively engaged in a massive campaign of human slaughter in Southeast Asia seemed so hypocritical to Prine. He responded by writing a song called "Your Flag Decal Won't Get You Into Heaven Anymore," which we will be singing for offering. A group called the Magpie Gathering, troubled by the violent language of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, reimagined it as a message of peace in their song, "Mine Eyes Have Seen the Glory," which will be our closing song today. There's so many more whose messages might not be explicitly patriotic, but who proclaim the kinds of truth we need to advance the struggle to make our country, this country we love or want to be able to love, into a more just society. Voices like Bob Dylan, Pete Seeger, Florence Reese, Marvin Gaye, Ani DeFranco, Buffy St. Marie, Jackson Brown, Brandy Carlisle, Holly Near, the Smothers Brothers, the Beatles, Nina Simone, Phil Oakes, Joan Baez, Sam Cooke, Buffalo Springfield, to name just a few. I love my country. I love its landscapes, its cities. I love its natural beauty. I love its diverse, colorful, and beautiful people. I love it even while I sometimes hate it. I love it for the dream of what it can be, for the hope that if we pledge our allegiance not to a political entity incapable of returning our love, but to the task of working together for justice, maybe we can make this nation and this world a better place than it is. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Stephanie. I'm a friend of the Abbey, and I'm the superintendent for what's now known as the Eastern Nebraska District of the United Methodist Church, and I'm here on one of my least favorite holiday weekends. It stems from some childhood problems. My mother was a Danish immigrant. That in itself wasn't a problem, although it complicates how we feel about American holidays. She was very bad at American holidays because she did not have life training in how to celebrate them correctly. Also, she pretty much personally banned fireworks in the city of Lincoln when she was on the city council. It was the summer that my brother was going into 6th grade and I was going into 8th grade. And our classmates from Mickle Junior High still remind us about the time our mother ruined everyone's life for apparently decades. There are still repercussions from that. So 4th of July is complicated. It took me a while to realize that my Danish grandmother was originally a German American. So she began life being so German American in Iowa that her family did not speak German to her at all, English to her at all, until she went to 9th grade and an English-speaking school. So like church, school, home were all German until she gets to high school where she doesn't know English and had to do 9th grade twice. So that woman somehow goes to graduate school in maybe the 20s and meets a handsome Dane at Iowa State, and they travel to Denmark to get married. there are world wars going on at that time, and she thinks she's done with the United States. So instead of merely becoming a citizen of Denmark, she goes ahead and renounces her United States citizenship, which I think worked well for her until Mogens Plum, the handsome Dane, got a job at the University of Nebraska teaching dairy science, right? So after my parents' death, I'm reading through all of the carbon copies of the negotiations of that contract, and one of the letters says, "Dear Mogens, we have a way for you and the children to come to the United States. Your wife may need to wait a bit." Yeah, so my Danish grandmother, who truly did immigrate as a Danish citizen to the U.S., had already been a United States citizen. I find this fascinating. Also, in the midst of all of that, it occurred to no one to teach the grandchildren either German or Danish, in which she was fluent, because at the time, it was so important to assimilate into culture in Lincoln. My grandmother was so ashamed of her husband's accent, was very worried someone would think he or the children were German. They came to the U.S. in 1949, and I think about that, but I also think about the stories of how welcoming Northeast Lincoln was to this young family, and how it was at First United Methodist Church in downtown Northeast Lincoln, in University Place, that they found their truest welcome. Growing up in the household of the mother who banned fireworks, the stories of her childhood were both of living in occupied Denmark and of the welcome they found in University Place in Lincoln. All of these things were true, and all of them mattered and probably were part of why she didn't know what to do with the 4th of July. We also ate salmon on Thanksgiving, right? So in addition, I have some trouble with music because at times I become what we call a synthete, in that my senses get confused. So I will taste colors. It's when I'm stressed out, and at times I can become just nonverbal because there's too many senses and they're all confused. So sometimes with music, I don't actually hear the words, I hear the color, or I see the picture, and I'm unable to tell anybody what happened. Reading for comprehension can also be complicated for that reason. And so sometimes my interaction with music it's always beautiful, but can be hard to describe. I also played a lot of second violin growing up. I think I was more talented than that, but I really hate practicing. And so is anyone else here a second violin player or a third French horn? I see you. So this is how it goes, especially if you're playing in the background of Bye Bye Birdie and then your third violin, because you can read the music. It goes like this. Bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum, dugga, dugga, dugga. So that's what I hear when I hear music. I hear that part. So, problems with American holidays, some different kinds of interfaces with music is what's going on, in my life. So, when I think about music, I think it's very important that we pay attention, because what we read and what we listen to can be random in that it comes into our lives, but we have choices to make. A couple years ago, I got really excited about the Spotify end of the year thing. Are you familiar with this? For those of us who use Spotify, and I have upped my game since the bishop informed me a year ago, you're going to be driving a lot. For me, you need to go ahead and pay the money to not have ads on your Spotify account. Well, you get to the end of the year, and it gives back to you what you listen to the most. Song titles, artists, genres. All my friends were posting their end of the year list, and they were very lovely lists. People were listening to jazz. They were listening to all kinds of diverse things, and I was very proud of what was going to be on my list. It revealed that that year, somehow, and I think this was a mistake, I think my phone was playing music when I wasn't listening. My top album was Hail Satin by the Foo Fighters. That's their cover album of the Bee Gees songs. I'm confident I wasn't listening to it that much, but that was my number one album. And my number one genre was yacht rock. Oh my gosh, it was horrifying, horrifying. I did not even know who Boz Scaggs was, but he was one of my other top artists, and I mean no harm to him. But a person should actually know about their top artist. So at that point, I decided I needed to be more intentional about what I'm listening to. Spotify revealed some blind spots for me. And so I started asking Spotify to show me a more diverse grouping of music. Last year's list was much better. It was less white, and it had better rhythms in it. So this year, I already know that my Spotify list will have at its number one artist and song the Brandi Carlile version of Closer to Fine. That is not Spotify's doing, that's my own. It's the song that I play every Sunday on my way to church. So it's what was on the way here. It's been that way for a year now. Easter Sunday, when I hit 4 different worship services, I'm Closer to Fine all the way there. But what I'm intrigued by is that this was not a song that I paid much attention to when it was first sung. My friends really enjoyed it. It's college-ish era for me. And I do think a lot of us imprint the music of our teenage and our early 20 years. So I'll find people who love a band. I'm like, why? And then I'll figure out, oh, you were 21 when that came out. This makes so much more sense now. And so I think what happened in this new version is this. It's slower. The harmony has been inverted. So what was the second violin part is now being sung as a melody. We finally won. And when Carlile sings it, she slows down for these words that I think have to do with what it means to be a good citizen. The less I seek my source, for some definitive, the closer I am to Fine. I think those lyrics do 2 things for us. One, it reveals that we all have our own source, but perhaps the answer isn't always in our source. Somebody else's source might also have truth in it. And sometimes we get caught up seeking some definitive. Whenever in my life I hear words that I feel are veering towards white nationalism, I almost always am hearing words where somebody is quoting one source and trying to tell me there is only one definitive. Not the lack of definitive I know from the childhood stories of my mother, which combine a refugee from the United States, well, not a refugee, an import from the United States who's a German American to Denmark, navigating a German occupation with her children. There is no definitive there, is there? And then we also have a restoration of the word fine. Sometimes we use the word fine like, it's fine. When I hear this song being sung by Brandi Carlile and her wife, the less I seek my source for some definitive, the closer I am to fine. I hear, yeah, I'm fine. Take that. We're going to win this thing because we're fine. And I like reclaiming that word. Every day doesn't have to be your top whatever day that you put in the photo album. That would be really annoying. Also, most photo albums are falling apart and can't be found right now, right? Oh my gosh, I was at a friend's house, have this fancy frame. You can put all your kids' art in it, so it's not all on the fridge. It has a hinge. She took it off the wall to show me the second piece of art. We couldn't even get it back on the wall. It was falling apart because there was so much art in there from preschool. Fine is excellent. I have another hymn I wanted to share with you that's quite fine. And it's something I think about when I think about my mom. She died 2 years ago. And I think about her more often than I thought I would. And it's a song that our family has always cherished around the 4th of July. Jan Sibelius is a Finnish composer. He wrote orchestral pieces, so that is firmly in our heart as a family, dense with strings. And so that really appeals to a second violinist because we get the good parts whenever Sibelius is writing. The tune name is Finlandia because he's Finnish, and it appears in the United Methodist hymnal as This Is My Song. But it's a song that we sing for everyone, and it's a song that growing up, my church home sang on this weekend, and whenever I get to pick the music 4th of July weekend, I invite people to make their definitive this source and this song. It's a hymn that we sing because it makes space for all the nations, for more than one truth, and for people to love where it is they live, while loving that other people are living and that they love also where they live. So I share these words. Finland is not Denmark, but it's adjacent, and I think that made my mom happy also. This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. This is my home, the country where my heart is. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my holy shrine. But other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine. My country's skies are bluer than the ocean, and sunlight beams on clover leaf and pine. But other lands have sunlight too, and clover, and skies everywhere are as blue as mine. Oh, hear my song, thou God of all the nations, a song of peace for their land and for mine. I think we're at our best when we appreciate where it is that we live, when we appreciate the people who lived here before our nation was constructed, when we realize that there's never been one definitive, but that in the midst of that, God makes space for the human structures in the midst of our fallibility and gives us the peace to find peace with and for one another.